Join me, if you would, in Proverbs chapter 6. Before we get there, today is Father's Day. You knew that. So to those of you who are fathers, happy Father's Day. I want to take just a brief moment to affirm the worthiness, the dignity, and the significance of being a father. It seems popular in our culture to demean fathers, to belittle fathers, to poke jokes at dads for telling corny jokes, for being a little bit disengaged from reality, being a little bit of a doofus, as though generally fathers are like Homer Simpson incarnate. That is a load of nonsense. That is rarely the fact, particularly among the men of our church. That doesn't mean we are without fault. That means that all who are called to father are called to a noble and a worthy responsibility. And the wind of the Spirit is at your back, dads, to do the work that God has given you to do. Regardless of how you are prone to think about your fathering, regardless of the mistakes you have made, you can, by God's grace, be a noble and worthy father that blesses your wife and blesses your children and your grandchildren. So wherever you hear in our culture that fathers are dumb, fathers are disengaged, fathers don't really know what they're doing, fathers are liable to mess it up, you reject that lie and say, God has made me a father. His Spirit is at my back, moving me in the direction that He would have me go to fulfill a noble and a meaningful calling in this life. In Proverbs this morning, we're going to see some practical instruction that applies to fathering and mothering and just life in general. Proverbs, we're in chapter 6. Proverbs is full of sound counsel to live a richer, more meaningful life. There are all kinds of pro tips, life hacks. Before there were YouTube videos that helped you understand to do the practicalities of life, Solomon wrote Proverbs, much to accomplish the same thing. However, if all you get out of Proverbs is tips and lessons on how to live a better life, you leave on the table the greatest blessing that the Proverbs are intended to lead you to. And that's the person of Jesus Christ, who is the embodiment of wisdom, who is life incarnate. Jesus criticized the religious professionals of his day, saying, "You search the Scriptures," which would be our Old Testament. "You search the Scriptures because you think that by them you have life. And yet they point to me." Jesus is the source of life. So as you read through the Proverbs, as we preach through the Proverbs, we do well to endeavor to make the connection to Jesus, so that as we travel through the book of Proverbs, picking up life tips, that we do well to hear God made life with a design and a purpose. He knows how it works. Do what He says, and you will be blessed. So pick the nuggets up that are along the path as we go. But let the path take you to Jesus. So this morning in Proverbs chapter 6, there's 3 sections. One is about debt, that I think actually is about promise making and promise keeping. Then the second section is about timely action. Uses the language of a sluggard or a sloth, laziness. And I think it's ultimately an admonition or an encouragement to be diligent, which is one part timeliness and one part priorities. And then it ends with the never popular warning of judgment. In each section and all together, I want you to be thinking, how does this path take us to Jesus? Where is Jesus the fulfillment of this? Where does Jesus give us hope to walk on this path? As we consider promise making and promise keeping, and then in the middle section, like diligent, timely action, and then as we consider judgment. All right, Proverbs chapter 6, join me there. We'll consider the first section together, verses 1 through 5. This is the word of God. My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor, have given your pledge for a stranger, if you are snared in the words of your mouth, caught in the words of your mouth, Then do this, my son, and save yourself, for you have come into the hand of your neighbor. Go, hasten, and plead urgently with your neighbor. Give your eyes no sleep and your eyelids no slumber. Save yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the hand of the fowler. Don't make a promise you can't keep. I think that's what this is saying. Don't make a promise you can't keep. The immediate context would be co-signing for a loan, putting up surety for your neighbor, security. It means you have said to your neighbor, hey, you go and secure a loan on my integrity and my resources. This is what it says, putting up pledge for whether it's your neighbor or a stranger. This is a warning about making a promise that may or may not be in your ability to keep. The Bible does not forbid lending. The Bible does not forbid you from using your integrity, your influence, your resources for the benefit and the blessing of others. But always in the Scriptures is a warning given about making promises that you might not be able to keep, especially when you're making a promise that you might have to fulfill based on another person's conduct. Right? So practical wisdom is applied in this often in lending institutions, often not always. We went through the housing crisis where sound thinking that happens in this case to be biblical principles were completely neglected, and lending institutions were just giving out all kinds of purchasing power to people who ought not to have had it. But generally speaking, why is it that you can't go to a bank and say, I want to buy this really expensive thing, can I please have this money? They say, what? Well, you're going to have to fill out an application. What are they trying to figure out? Do you have enough resources that it's reasonable that you're going to be able to pay the debt? You're going to make a promise that you're going to pay it back. Do you actually have the power to keep that promise? Now, we can make this practical, like almost immediately. Have you made promises that you can't keep? Don't do it. Don't make promises you can't keep. How easy is it to speak a promise? I have the wonderful privilege of being the father of 4 wonderful children. It's easy to make promises, right? Hey, we'll do that this weekend. Hey, Dad, can we? Yeah, we'll do that tonight. Wow, the number of times I have just made a promise in a moment for all kinds of reasons. You examine your own heart to explore why you would make promises that you might not be able to keep. I have made many of them to my kids. I don't want to be bothered by their nagging. I want to delight them. And I want to be a good dad, doggone it. So when kid says, hey, could we read tonight before bed? Like, how do you say no to that? Like, yes, we can. And then bedtime comes, and children, as they are wont to do, don't really care how late it is at bedtime. It's mom and dad that are like, it's getting late. So it's 9:45, and son says, hey, are we going to read Narnia tonight? You said we could read Narnia tonight. It's so easy to make promises, much harder to keep them, is it not? This is practical wisdom that says, think about the promises you make. And if you are tempted to leverage your resources, your integrity, on the actions of somebody else, in the book of Proverbs, bad idea every single time it comes up. Not because people are inherently untrustworthy, not because you should hoard your resources to the exclusion of others, but because our ability to keep promises is limited by our power. right? If you have a debt for $10,000, I have enough resources that I could be surety, a guarantee of that debt. I could say to your lender, if they default on $10,000, I am good for it. I have that much power. Not a whole lot more beyond that. So you may be entirely trustworthy, and you go to a bank or a lending institution and they ask me, do I have $150,000 that says so-and-so is going to keep their commitment? Whether or not so-and-so, I believe, has integrity to keep their commitment, I don't have enough money to keep the promise. I think this is what the Proverbs are getting at, which is why the instruction is that if you've made a promise you can't keep, humble yourself and get out of it. Look at the instruction. If you've done this, if you've been snared, if you've been caught, one, you've done it to yourself, so recognize that. Do this. Save yourself. The instruction to save, it's twice repeated, again in verse 5. This is how significant Solomon makes this. Here's what you do. Go, hasten, plead urgently, take action. The word for hasten is indicative of humility. Go to the person and admit your mistake. I should not have made a promise. I don't actually have the power, if it goes sideways, to keep that promise. I have the power, if all goes right, to look like I could keep the promise, but I don't actually have the power to keep the promise. If you find yourself in a place where you have made a promise that if the unforeseen event occurs, if you would immediately become anxious and afraid of how you would fulfill that promise, then immediately go. Go, it says. Hasten quickly. Humble yourself and just say, I made a mistake. And plead with the person to let you out of it. There's an interesting juxtaposition in the intensity of the words. Hasten is humble. Plead urgently is like, go lower yourself in front of the person that you've made this promise to, and then be loud and boisterous, pleading for them to let you out. Like, you got to go and say, I promised more than I should have promised. That's actually beyond my power. I don't know the future. I don't actually know what will happen. And I don't actually have the resources, whether it's financial or otherwise. When I was a high school student, I leveraged my integrity for a friend that I really enjoyed from school to get a job at the place that I worked. I wanted my friend to be happy. I wanted to help him. And I wanted my boss to see me as like one who was coming up with solutions. I have a hard time with people who point out problems that don't suggest answers. Boss had a problem. I'm like, here's a potential answer. Look, I can get you a worker. And to my friend, look, I can get you a job. Foolish. I never counted the cost. I never considered that my friend might actually be a crappy worker, which within 2 shifts he proved to be. And I leveraged my integrity for that. And then I created a problem that I couldn't fix because I didn't have the authority to fire employees. So my boss had to do that. So I created more work for him, made a relationship difficult with my friend because I made a promise that I couldn't keep. So this isn't just monetary. Sometimes it's your reputation. Sometimes it's your influence. If you have made a promise that you can't keep, humble yourself before that person and do everything you can to get out. That's the instruction. If we are limited in our ability to keep promises by the power that we have, how does this make one who is looking for Jesus and the pathway to Jesus? What does this call to mind about Jesus? And one's ability to keep promises that one makes. Think about that. We'll come back to it. Now, the second section is dealing with a different subject entirely. They're connected by the imagery, in this case, of sleeping. Notice verse 4, give your eyes no sleep, your eyelids no slumber. If you've made a promise you can't keep, The time is now, not for sleeping, but for action. Now he uses a similar image to address diligence. Go to the ant, O sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. Her ways. There are plenty of times in Proverbs where the feminine, the female, the woman is placed in a noble, honorable light. When Proverbs speak of sexual immorality, as we considered last week, the woman is evil, because sexual immorality is personified to a young man that Proverbs is written to as a woman. But now here in this case, to the young man, the woman, the feminine, is seen as noble and right. Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, without having any chief, officer, or ruler. She prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. And poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. This is a warning against laziness. This is a proactive instruction, an encouragement, a command to be diligent. Diligence, in this section, I think, is two parts. It's timeliness, and it's the right action. So you hear people say today, the right thing at the right time is the right thing. First is the right time. Notice the one who is wise, the one who is diligent, it's contrasted to a sluggard or a sloth. Isn't a sloth like a wonderful creature? The way they're portrayed. I've never owned one, but I know the way they're portrayed in movies, especially cartoons. They seem so friendly and so gentle and so painfully slow. All of the Proverbs, all throughout the Proverbs, creation is used as a tool by God to teach us wisdom. And when you consider a sloth, you should be the opposite. Don't be a sloth. Don't be a sluggard. That's what it's saying. The one who is wise, not like a sloth, is diligent, is active. There's no chief, no officer, no ruler. There's no boss saying, okay, this morning, here's the schedule. We're going to do this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And at noon, we're going to eat. And then at 5, we're going to take a break. You are internally. The one who is wise is internally motivated. You, under your own authority, can take action. And it's action that's timely. So the ant. In this case, I have read there are certain varieties of ants called harvester ants in this part of the world that actually store grain in preparation for winter. They don't have a supervisor. They just know what to do. And they know the time. Look, she prepares her bread in summer, gathers her food in harvest. She knows when it's time for sleeping, when it's time for resting. She knows the difference. The one who is wise knows the seasons of their life and what the action that is appropriate for that season. So it presents a pretty quick question. Do you know the season rightly of your life? The season when your kids are young requires different action than the season when your kids are grown. The season when your parents are nearing death is a different season. The season when your spouse is ill is a different season. And does not each season require a different emphasis of action? The one who is discerning, the one who is wise, knows the seasons. Do you know the season rightly? Do you know the difference between the time for work, the time for action, and the time for rest? My favorite professor in seminary, in teaching through the book of Proverbs, said to us as aspiring pastors, be careful when you teach about laziness to Americans, because Americans generally, by and large, aren't lazy people. We are work, 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 work. Culturally, we are really diligent. Culturally, even, I would suggest, often a little hyper-diligent when it comes to work. We tend to have an overwork problem, not an underwork problem, generally speaking. So, consider vacation habits and practices for most Americans compared to most Europeans. Now you're thinking, yeah, but they're lazy and they don't work very hard. Right, that illustrates my point, that as Americans we think work, 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 work. All right, so let's not go too far on this. I'm not saying work, 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 work. I'm saying the one who is wise knows the times and the seasons of your life. Do you know the time for work? Do you know the time for rest? Our culture, I think we confuse leisure and rest. There seems to be abounding leisure in our culture, not very much rest. Work goes with rest. Leisure tends to just give us small doses of pleasure so that we're not working, but interestingly, not actually resting either. Have you ever been on vacation and at the end of your vacation said, I'm exhausted. I need a vacation from my vacation? I would suggest to you, you probably had a lot of leisure and maybe not a whole lot of rest. Because how do you feel after you're well rested? Energized? Eager? Good attitude? Ready to get back to work? Work is a gift from God, and it is good. It's for our enjoyment. It's for the developing of humanity and the blessing of one another. Work is good. Rest prepares you for more work. Do you know the difference between leisure and rest, between work and the time to rest? The one who is wise knows the seasons. Timeliness is the first part of it, and then the right action. Verse 8, the ant prepares, the ant gathers. Do you prioritize the right action? If you want to be wise, you have to be diligent. That means timeliness, but it also means the right action. In the season of your life that you're in, are you prioritizing the right action? Or are you giving in to some of the inherent laziness of the fallen human heart that just says, I'll get to that later, I'll get to that later, I'll get to that later? We know what this is like. You feel some conviction. I really need to pursue that person. Or I really need to become more disciplined again, spending time with God and His Word. I really should take seriously, I really need to do a better job praying. I've said that a million times. But isn't the easiest response, you're right, I need to do that later. We'll get to it. We'll get to it. We'll get to it. Solomon draws our attention. When you do that, just a little bit at a time, little sleep, little slumber, just a little folding of the hands to rest. My mom's dad, he passed away when I was in high school. He used to come to our house and he would start dozing off in the living room, at the dining room table, and he would just say, I'm just going to rest my eyes just for a minute. Little by little, deferred action, the wrong priorities, and then all of a sudden poverty will come upon you like a robber and want like an armed man. When the robber comes, they are dogged and determined. An armed, violent person is coming to get something and take it from you. Solomon is saying, when you don't prioritize the right action at the right time, there are consequences, and you will pay the piper. Consequences will come, and it's too late. You have to endure the consequences. Be wise. Know the right action. Know the right seasons of your life. And prioritize. It's really easy, especially when we're feeling overwhelmed or don't know what to do. I am most vulnerable to laziness. A synonym would be procrastination. When I don't know what to do and I'm feeling overwhelmed. I've shared this with you before. I have an affliction called reality avoidance syndrome. I have diagnosed myself, which is as good as a doctor because I read about it online. When I'm feeling overwhelmed and I don't know what to do, I want to avoid. Proverbs would say, take a step of action. Get out of bed. A little folding of the hands, a little rest, a little slumber. The antidote is just move. Get up. Take a step. A practical phrase, discipline begets discipline. When you find yourself feeling overwhelmed and not knowing what to do, take one step. One step of discipline often begets additional steps of discipline. Super practically, like if you're one, the alarm goes off in the morning. What's the bad habit? Many of us have this. What's the bad habit? Alarm goes off in the morning. What do? Snooze, snooze, snooze again, alarm goes off again. Everybody in the house can hear your alarm and is like, all right already, get out of bed. Snooze, snooze. Have you ever considered, if you're one struggling with feeling overwhelmed or lazy, if discipline begets discipline, which it does, stop hitting the snooze button. This is really practical. Put the alarm somewhere else. When the alarm goes off, get your carcass out of bed, go over there, turn that thing off. Do not return to the bed. Go anywhere else but your bed. Okay, maybe don't go to the couch too. Avoid those two places. Take a step. How true of this, much more consistently, is this true? When you feel like there's action you should do, but you're overwhelmed, you don't know exactly how to do it, take a step. This is incredibly practical. But how does this cause us to think of Jesus? Timely action. Having priorities that are right. What does that have to do with Jesus? We'll come back to that. Last section, a warning of judgment. Verses 12 through 15. A worthless person, a wicked man, goes about with crooked speech, winks with his eyes, signals with his feet, points with his finger, with perverted heart devises evil, continually sowing discord. Therefore calamity will come upon him suddenly. In a moment he will be broken beyond healing. The worthless person, the Hebrew for this is of Belial. It's, in the Old Testament, a reference to wickedness, to evil, just corruption to the core. In the New Testament, it actually becomes a word for the devil. Solomon draws our attention to wickedness, total corruption. Now, this is one who is undermining community, undermining the fabric of relationships. Verse 14, with perverted heart devises evil, continually sowing discord. This is a troublemaker. This is a gossip. This is somebody who slanders. This is someone who is purposefully undermining relationships. Ever done that? Ever not spoken the truth in a situation because you were afraid? Ever not been a peacemaker in a place that needed a peacemaker because you weren't sure of how it would go? Ever let other people around you know that you were dissatisfied with a friend? Ever passively, subtly tried to get people on your team against that other person? I mean, yeah, that's everybody in the room has done stuff like that. This is what Solomon draws attention to. When this becomes defining of your life, the worthless person, the wicked person, has judgment in their future. Now, very few of us are ever going to read Proverbs 12 through 15 and say, I think that's describing me. I mean, when we're talking about the one who might make a promise that they shouldn't have made, yeah, I've done that. I could see myself there. And then when you consider the subject of being diligent, yeah, I've been lazy a few times. But then you get to this next section, the worthless, wicked person. It's I'm trying to think who that might be. Probably not me, right? So, lest we think that judgment and wickedness doesn't apply to us, I think this section ends with a pretty provoking invitation to consider our own hearts. Let me show you why I think that's the case in verse 16 to 19. There are 6 things that Yahweh hates. The I Am hates. The Lord hates. 6 things that the Lord hates. 7 that are an abomination to him. And then now he's going to list 5 body parts going from the top of your body to your feet, and then 2 particular individuals. 5 body parts: haughty eyes, lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord amongst brothers. There's lots of parallel language in these last 3 verses before the verses that immediately preceded it. Lots of the same body parts are mentioned. 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination. In Hebrew poetry, this is a way to say this list is not exhaustive. There are 6 things. No, 7. There are 3. No, 4. All it's saying is this list is not exhaustive. It's not saying these are the 7 things that God hates the most. It's just saying this list is not exhaustive. There's lots of other things in the scriptures that explicitly say God hates. God hates divorce. That's not written in here. Sexual immorality, God hates. It's an abomination to God. That's not on the list. All kinds of things aren't on this list. It's not exhaustive. And secondly, this is another one of those chiastic structures. Remember, arrow on its side, or you could think of it like a mountain. The center is the focal point of attention. The beginning and the end match, the second and the second to last match, the third to last match, and in this case of 7, the very middle item. Item number 4 is the one that we have our attention drawn to. And which one is that in this list, if you have your Bible open? Verse 18a, a heart that devises wicked plans. Jesus taught and talked often about the heart. Examining your own heart, knowing your own heart, knowing your own propensity for foolishness, your own tendency towards wickedness. You look at this list of things. A haughty eyes, that's pride. The scriptures say, think of yourself with sober judgment. If you think of yourself too highly or think of God too lowly, that's a problem with pride. A lying tongue. This is someone who plays loose with the truth, who plays loose with the facts, who distorts reality for their own purposes. I'm guilty of that. Hands that shed innocent blood. This is a person of violence. Implied is a lack of control of your anger. But Jesus said you're guilty of violence, you're guilty of murder when you're unrighteously angry towards someone in your heart. Search your heart, know your own heart, because you're not going to say, I'm the worthless person, I'm the wicked man. If you do, good news for you. You don't have to stay in that condition. When you're already convinced that you're a sinner and you're wretched, it is really appealing to consider what God says about Christ and his mercy and forgiveness. But often the greater barrier of coming to Jesus is the first step of acknowledging you have deviated massively from the goodness of God's plan. So it ends, I think, with an opportunity for each one to examine their own heart in the light of a future judgment. Because these are things that God hates, God despises. These are all things that will meet the judgment of God. Let's end with Jesus now. How does a consideration of promise making and promise keeping and timely, decisive action on the most important things and judgment have to do with each other? How do these go together? Well, Jesus is the guarantee. The scriptures tell us, book of Hebrews, we're offered a better way to know God. There is actual hope because Jesus is the guarantee of a better covenant. I mean, think about this. Jesus does the very things the Proverbs tells us not to do. Do not make a promise you can't keep when it's in another person's power to do the right thing, right? Don't say, I promise on behalf of another person who's supposed to do the action. But that's what Jesus has done. Jesus has given his own life as a guarantee of your salvation. How can Jesus do that? Because he has the power to keep all of his promises. Where our power is little, his power is massive. So Paul says in Ephesians, the Holy Spirit is a deposit. Doing what? Guaranteeing what is to come. We have to be very careful about making promises we can't keep. Jesus has made the greatest of promises, and he can keep them all, because there is no limit to his power to keep them. Jesus, the scriptures tell us, at the fullness of time, came, in the book of Galatians, born of a woman, born under law, to redeem those under the law. The book of Romans, at just the right time, Christ died for us, though we were ungodly and apart from God, at just the right time. Who is the epitome and the fulfillment of diligence to know the right time and to prioritize the right action at the right time? This is what Jesus has done. Jesus' ability to make a promise and keep a promise, Jesus' timely and decisive action then delivers from judgment all who will repent of their sin and follow him. It is certainly not popular, I imagine it's never been popular, for any person to consider the reality of a future judgment that they don't stack up against on their own merit. Nobody likes to be judged. We say all the time, don't judge me, no one can judge me. Sometimes we say only God can judge me. Okay, I agree with that. Yep, only God can judge you, and God will. You are not a self-made being. You are made by one, designed by one, and accountable to one, who loves you so much that he made the provision of a promise maker, who is a promise keeper, who knew the exact right time to come and do the most important work in all the world so that you and I could be delivered from a certain judgment. So as you rightly consider these Proverbs, pick up the life tips along the way. Don't make promises you can't keep. And if you have, get out of there. And be diligent in your action. Know the seasons of your life. And diligently do the right thing at the right time. Yeah, for sure, do that. But don't miss that Jesus makes a promise you can't make. And he can keep a promise that you can't keep. And at just the right time, he has died for you, so that you can know the right time when the invitation is offered to you to turn from your sin and place your faith in Jesus, so that you can escape the condemnation of judgment that you have rightly earned. Let me pray for us.